Well, since you made it this far to get to this lesson, number 15, it proves that you're dedicated and that you now have a firm understanding of all the issues required to understand before you can start writing firewall rules. So congratulations for getting this far. Now, the firewall rules are addressed in Lesson 4, which does an intro to firewall rules. Lesson 8, which talks about the functional packet chains within the router. And Lesson 9, which talks about ping testing firewall chain rules. And it also talks about some window gotchas there that affect your ping testing. So today we're going to start and talk about these basic concepts. First of all, comment viewing. Over here I have Winbox running. If you notice, my comments are above each rule. There's also an option up here under settings to have inline comments. If you have that set, and I think that's default, your comments end up over here, which to me aren't very useful because they're way to the right and out of the way. So I prefer to put the comments inline. And that proves quite useful while we're doing filter rules. So much for that subject. The rules are packet header matchers. In other words, if we find a match, then some action is taken. And I want to point out that the firewall rules do help protect administrative access of your router, but they do a crappy job. It's better to use the SSH keys. They make it much more secure. And the other purpose of firewall filter rules is to protect your clients from unauthorized access. And that's mostly what we'll be dealing with here with these firewall rules. The firewall rules are also worthless if someone can access your router configuration and change the rules. So the rules is only good if it stands without change. And the rules are tested sequentially from top to bottom. So in other words, first is to check rule 0, which is just all it does is run some counters for us. And then rule number 1, if it matches that condition, then it accepts it. And rule number 2, if it matches that condition, it accepts it. It keeps going down looking for a match till it finds a match. When you get to the bottom, there may not be a match for anything. You may not have considered what's going on here, and then you want to drop that packet because you don't know it didn't meet any of your rules, so you don't want to deal with it. So that's the basic concepts of how these firewall filter rules work. There's much more to the firewall besides the filter rules. For example, we have address lists. We don't have any right now, but you could have some. And connections. These are actual real-life connections right now on my router, which is connected to my computer, my Windows computer. So if you click on one of these connections, then you get more information about it. If we enable tracking, then we can set these parameters for the tracking, and the tracking will take place. Then we have service ports. These are the ports that can be used by the firewall. Notice these aren't the ports we've been looking at in the past. We've always been looking at ports related to access to the router configuration. These are actually user ports that can be used by the people that are connected to your router. And we have raw actions, which we're going to skip that for today. We have Mango, which basically allows you to tag all the packets going in or going out or coming in either way. You can put a tag on it, and then you can keep track of how often that's happening. And then NAT, we have to deal with, you hear the term masquerade all the time. That just means it's going to take a local private IP address and turn it into a public internet address for you. And then last but not least, we have the filter rules. So let's go ahead and go through some of these filter rules and see what's actually taking place. Okay, let's first address this fast track business. What the heck is fast track all about? Well, the first rule, rule 0, what it does, it counts fast track packets. So let's go down here and see what fast track's all about. Fast track is a forward chain, and what it will forward is connection states that are established and related. So that means someone's already done a handshake. We've agreed that user on the other end is acceptable, and now we're passing packets back and forth, lots of packets. So if we can use this connection state status to filter incoming packets, then what we can do, we'll call that fast track. What we can do is those packets will in fact not have to be processed by the rules below fast track. So we saw the fast track passes established and related. Related means that that established created another connection, and it's related to the original established connection. So down here under accepted forward, you notice we have established, related, and untracked. So what are we talking about here? Untracked. Untracked means that we're passing packets that we don't care about the connection state. If you agreed earlier to let packets, certain packets go into certain interfaces, certain ports, whatever, untracked, then this connection state will not be tracked, and that will take the workload off of the router. It's kind of a risky deal. It's not recommended, but some people do it. So that's the difference between these two, is untracked is the only difference. Fast track has to have connection established before it will pass these things through. So this all takes the workload off the router, because the router has to process every stinking packet that goes through here. So if you're on a home router, you only have 2 or 3 users, then it's not a big deal. But if a business has 100 users, this packet quantity can get very high very quickly. So that's the purpose of fast track. So during this default filter rules, you notice what rule allows a new connection to be established. Well, if you go through all these rules, you find there aren't any. None of these allow a new connection to be established. What happens is there's no drop everything at the bottom, so if it falls out the bottom, then the new packet goes to whoever he's trying to go to, and they may or may not respond to it, and they may or may not establish the connection. So the default routers rules that you get from the factory use the let anything fall through the bottom, and that's how we establish new connections. One thing you could do, if you don't want everything to fall out the bottom, you can establish a new connection. And in this new connection, we can come down here and we can say, pass a new connection state. So that'll allow the new to go pass through the firewall. And this way you can also, by establishing that rule, we're going to accept a new connection to pass through. Now it's up to the user that it's being sent to respond with that new connection. So now we can add a drop everything at the bottom. If we didn't think of it, we're going to drop it. So that'd be another rule we add below that, which says forward for anything, we just drop it. We don't put any conditions, we just drop it. Let's drop all not considered. So this is a safe way to run your router. Everything you didn't consider will be dropped. So now this is drop all not considered, drop any forwards you didn't think about. So that gets rid of all those things you didn't consider, but this still allows a new connection to be established. If you just did this without this new connection, then you can never get a new connection because there's no other rules that allow a new connection, and then we drop everything for protection. But now we have a rule which does in fact allow new connections. So that takes care of that subject. Okay, next we'll take a look at these IPsec policies. Notice there's an input policy and there's an output policy. If we go up here and you look at what that is, that's just simply Internet Protocol security. So it's various ways of sending secure traffic across the Internet. So we're going to leave those things alone. We don't want to mess with that. The other thing I'm looking at here is rule number 3, which is ICMP. So what is ICMP? ICMP is things like the ping. They're functional test protocols such as ping. So we're going to disable that. I don't want people pinging my router, the input to my router, which is my configuration. access to my router. They don't need to know anything about that. So I'm just going to disable that one and not use that as part of the defaults. Another consideration here is item rule number 5, drop ball not coming from the LAN. If you have to use Wi-Fi to access your router, then you don't want to do this rule because that rule will prevent you from accessing it. So if you're using Wi-Fi, you want to disable this rule. I'm not. I'm using Ethernet cable connection, so I'm going to keep this rule in place. Once again, I don't want people trying to access my router configuration. Another consideration down here is rule number 11, drop all from WAN not destinated. What that means is that if it's from the wide access network, wide area network, which is the internet basically, and if it's new and the connection state is destination natted, in other words, it knows where it's going, then it's going to forward it. So it's going to allow it. I do in fact have a problem with the factory default filter rules sequence. And what I mean by that is, what's the most common thing that's going to happen here in this router? Those should be tested first, right? Because that way you don't have to go through all these other things to test all these other things, since the rules are tested sequentially from top to bottom. So it would seem to me that all the forward rules should be at the top, because forwarding packets happens much more often than inputs or outputs to the router itself. So I think that all these forwards should be at the top. That way all the forwards don't go through all these other rules. Here they got accept this forward way down here. It had to go through all these rules before it got to this rule to say, okay, let it go forward. I mean, what's the point? If you want to increase the efficiency of your router, I would think you want all the forwards as the first chain rules. If someone disagrees with me, please explain where I'm wrong, and I'd be willing to discuss that. So this pretty much completes the discussion of the filter rules within the MikroTik firewall. Hopefully this will get your head pointed in the right direction so you can make up your own rules, make your own changes as required. So good luck with this lesson.